Today's younger generation may know Ed Miliband as one of Twitter's liveliest wits and raconteurs. What older viewers might remember is he was once leader of the Labour Party, and had things turned out differently, he would have been Prime Minister and Brexit wouldn't be happening. He writes in The Observer today that it's time to accept Brexit, but fight the version of it he says the right wants. Good morning.
Nice to be with you.
Now, Ian Hislop, persuade him.
I was the guy that didn't want the referendum. If there'd been a Labour government, if I'd been Prime Minister, we wouldn't have had it. I fought heart and soul for Remain, but when I was doing that, I said we're going to accept the result. And that's why I'm accepting the result. And I feel like that's what we've got to do. And I feel like for a principled reason, which is we had the referendum and there was a result, but I feel it for a pragmatic reason too. There are massive decisions to be made in the next 2 years and beyond, actually, about the future shape of this country, decisions of a gravity that we haven't made for 40 years, and we can't leave it to the right and centre-right, who by and large were on the Brexit side of the argument, to make those decisions. And in a way, even more so, because I think they want to use the referendum or use the pretext of the referendum to do things that were not the mandate of the referendum. Cut taxes, deregulate, slash workers' rights. Progressives have got to get on the pitch and not simply fight the last war.
Well, doesn't that, all of those horrors as you see them, isn't that a pretty convincing argument for going back to the country once a deal is done or once no deal is done and say, do you want to remain or leave?
No, because that assumes that it is inevitable that the outcome of Brexit is the things I said that we didn't want to see. I think progressive politics is harder with Brexit, significantly harder. That's what Hilary Benn and I say in our piece this morning. But it's not impossible. And you know, if you think about the 1945 Labour government, they came to power in the most dreadful circumstances, but they didn't say it's impossible to change things. And part of my point is, it's right to say we need to limit the damage, avoid hard Brexit. We've got to do more than that, though. So take workers' rights, for example. I hear people saying, we can't let workers' rights be reduced. Well, sure, that's right. But one of the things I heard in the referendum was that insecurity at work was actually an issue in this referendum. This wasn't just a referendum about our relationship with Europe, it was about the state of Britain. So let's argue for stronger workers' rights. Let's use the Brexit legislation to make the country more progressive. It is never impossible to do that.
What do you think of how Labour's policy on Brexit has evolved?
Well, I think the tests that we've set are right.
Do you think you could have done with those 3 months ago?
I think sort of second-guessing leaders or spokespeople, no, I had too much of that in my time.
Forgive me, second-guessing would be trying to predict the future. I'm saying, what do you think of what they did?
Well, I think Keir Starmer, Jeremy Corbyn have been handling a very difficult situation as best they possibly can, frankly, because, look, it's easier for other parties. If you're the Greens or the Liberal Democrats, you're essentially fishing in the 48% pool. If you're UKIP, you're fishing in the 52% pool. Labour is trying to do something much harder, which is to try and speak for the whole country. And by the way, that's another part of my argument. Our attack on Theresa May, part of it is she's ignoring the 48%. I think the sort of ignoring the verdict, going into this saying let's overturn it, I'm afraid looks like ignoring the 52%. We've got to speak for both. And by the way, I think there is more that unites Remainers and Leavers than might first appear, because they share common concerns about the way the country is run.
You mentioned right at the start of the interview that had things gone differently, you'd be Prime Minister and there would be no Brexit. How much did you, in the hours, days and weeks after defeat, think about that?
Well, about the prospect of the referendum, you mean?
Well, no, about what you were unsuccessful in achieving and the ramifications of that. You, I presume, took some personal responsibility for that.
Well, I take total responsibility, yeah.
And how did you deal with that as a person?
It's tough.
How did you deal with it? Did you cry?
No, I don't recall. But look, it was very upsetting. I mean, the days afterwards were very, very upsetting days.
Were you depressed?
I wouldn't describe it that way. Look, it's hard, very hard. Hard as I watch what's happening to the country.
And how did you deal with it? Did you seek solace in friends? Did you talk to people about it, or did you sit quietly?
I think that, you know, the obviously my family, my kids know who I am now, which is
No,
I'm kidding. But you know, there's something about being leader of the opposition. It's hard to have a sort of normal life. I tell you what has been one of the biggest pieces of solace for me is the British people, actually. The people you meet on the street. I mean, sometimes I ended up comforting them about it's when people say to you, "Oh, when that exit poll came out, wasn't it terrible?" And you say, "Yeah, I was there too." But you know, people saying, you know, "Look, I supported you," or "I liked some of the things you were saying," or "I didn't support you, but you know, I think some of what you might have been saying was right." I think it's part of it. And also, look, the other thing is, because I don't think one should be too introspective about this, and I'm not generally an introspective person.
No, I just thought I'd ask you since you were here.
No, sure. But I suppose I knew straight away that I didn't want to leave British politics, because I meant what I said when I resigned, which is there's other ways than being leader of taking forward the argument about the country.
By the way, did you, the various accounts of polling day that have been written by various people, they all seem to agree that you had, while you weren't cocky, you had a realistic expectation on the day that people were voting that you would be Prime Minister.
Yeah, I was hopeful. I was hopeful that we would win, sure.
So that exit poll must have been especially crushing.
Yeah, it was. It was a terrible shock. Of course it was a terrible shock. I mean, I think it was a terrible shock to lots of people. I believe the polls. I won't believe them again.
Do you believe the 25% for Labour polls?
Well, let's see what happens.
But that's where you are.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. And
do you believe it? Do you think that's where Labour is?
I don't know exactly where we are, and as I say, I don't.
But it ain't great.
No, it's hard, and I think it's particularly hard because of this issue of Brexit, because we are trying to speak to the whole country, and that is difficult. But you know, I genuinely mean this. You know, when I was the leader, I didn't appreciate people commentating on me, and I never thought it did much good. And I don't, and I've been very, very sparing about commentating on Jeremy Corbyn.
Let's talk about something you did as leader then, which was change the leadership rules.
Sure.
And there are some people, and of course Jeremy Corbyn fans are very excited about the leadership change, and they think that's great for Labour. Labour is now more a party of the left, they say. But there are others who say it's that rule change that you were instrumental in bringing in that's put Labour where it is.
I think it's a mistake to think about it like that, because Jeremy Corbyn won in every section of the membership. The idea of the idea of and he had to pass a threshold for that. But the idea of the membership electing the party, the membership and supporters electing the party, was something that was widely endorsed across the Labour Party. And I think it misses something here, which is, why has Jeremy Corbyn won 2 leadership elections? Because of a sense among party members, but not just among party members, that they felt there needed to be a more radical programme, by the way, a more radical programme even than I was offering. And in a way, I've got the humility to sort of accept that. I don't think it was just a sort of accident. Yeah. I think it went deeper than that. And you know, I think that from all wings of the party, you have to learn the lessons of that.
You said last summer that Jeremy Corbyn's position was untenable, and yet here he is.
Well, I supported Owen Smith against him in the second leadership election, and Jeremy won. And you've got to accept the result, a bit like what I say about Brexit. You know, I accept the result, and as I say, I think the role, particularly of ex-leaders, but across the party, is this is a collective effort, and you've got to focus on the collective effort.
And thinking of humility, do you think it's possible that Jeremy Corbyn supporters are right, and that Labour hasn't really tried a proper left-wing agenda for many years? It hasn't won an election on your sort of platform since 2005. Instead of people carping at Jeremy Corbyn, shouldn't they get fully behind him?
Well, I think that's what, by and large, people have done since he won his second mandate. And I think people recognise that it's important for him to be able to lead. And as I've said, I do think that he, in his leadership campaign, spoke to a sort of yearning that people had, not for sort of utopia, but for radicalism. Now, I don't quite agree with your characterisation of my programme, because I think I offered some of that radicalism, some of which we're seeing adopted not just by the Labour Party, but even sometimes by the Conservative Party. But I think there are always lessons to learn, and I think there are lessons to learn from his election, definitely.
Ed Miliband, good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks.